Welcome to Chinwag Tuesdays, your passport to a world of language and culture.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Chinwag Tuesdays. I'm Amanda and today's special guest is Nick. He's a linguist from South Australia who's now living in London. Thank you so much for joining me today, Nick.
Oh, thank you for having me on here. I'm looking forward to
Chinwag on a
talking about
Tuesday.
Aussie. Oh, totally. I'm in for it. That's it. Yep.
Oh, love it. All right, so obviously I've just said you're from South Australia, so maybe you can introduce yourself about where in South Australia you're from. I said that you're a linguist, but yeah, tell us what you're doing.
Right. Okay. So I was born almost 50 years ago now. So, yeah, birthday coming up in Elizabeth, which is the satellite city of Adelaide. Really working class place. Actually, that's where a lot of the 10-pound poms ended up as well. So that's the environment that I grew up in to start off with. I come from an ethnic background, let's just say. So my family originates from Macedonia. However, just to let you know that on my mother's side, I'm fourth generation Aussie. So my parents, on her side, her grandparents and great-grandparents were all living in Australia. So they immigrated all to Australia. So yeah, I've had family in Australia for almost 100 years. So yeah. So I've got that side of thing. But with having grown up in Australia, of course, I grew up not knowing English. So I grew up with loads and loads of other different languages that were being spoken around me. And as a small child, with people who didn't speak English and even didn't understand English, if I wanted food, like say, I want some food. Can I have some grub? No, didn't cut it with them. I have to speak their language. So I was forced into speaking Macedonian, Bulgarian, Serbo-Croatian, and a little bit of Greek as well from a very young age before I got into English. So I've been able to use that. And I've been living on and off in the UK for the past 23 years. And I am a translator from those languages, from Balkan Slavic languages. So we're talking about Macedonian, Bulgarian, Serbian, Bosnian, and Montenegrin, as they're called now. And they're my working languages. But also, I get asked all the time, oh, you're a translator. You're a translator. Oh, do you translate into Australian? And I was like, yep, I certainly do.
Damn straight I do.
I do. I actually adapt text from US and UK English mainly into Australian English. And there's a big market for it, of course, being Australia being such a rich country, 14th largest economy in the world. We've got a bit of coin to us. And so I'm there and I make text Aussie. So
awesome. I love it. Yeah. Oh, so cool. We have very similar backgrounds in terms of ethnic migration, let's say. So as I was saying before the call here, that my mum is Italian, but my grandparents immigrated from Italy in like the 1950s. My dad's side of the family, though, my dad's dad was from England, and Gran, she was born in Australia, and I think a couple of generations before her were also born in Australia. Gran and Granddad met during World War II. Gran was a volunteer for the women's, I think, Air Force, Reserve Air Force or something. And Granddad was working with the British Navy, and they met in Sydney during World War II. Yeah. But something interesting I found out, so Gran unfortunately passed away a few months ago now, actually exactly 2 months ago today on the 14th of February. And during her funeral, I was able to watch on video call, and I found out in her eulogy that her, I think, great-great-grandfather was one of the founding fathers of Toronto in Canada. And there's actually a street named after him. Yeah, and I Googled his name, but it's actually on there and everything. Yeah.
Wow.
So
family histories.
Crazy. Yeah. So this guy, I forget his name, something Jakes, his son, two of his sons moved to Australia, and it was them that is somehow connected to Gran, and then, I'm related to them. So anyway, yes, immigration's really interesting when you think about it. But yes, I grew up with Italian all around me. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this is one thing that also a lot of people have misapprehension about Australia as well, because the way that Australia is presented outside, especially when you've got, home and away, and a lot of the stars that we have from Australia come from Anglo English speaking backgrounds. So I do have a hard time first of all, just with my surname alone, being
Yeah.
Nasser, of course, a very typically Macedonian, Bulgarian, Russian surname. And people, I get all the time that like, are you sure you're Aussie? Are you sure you know what you're doing? And it was like, talk to me. Okay, I
Yeah.
think I know what I'm on about here.
Yeah.
Really, I have got a very Aussie accent. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, after that long living in the UK, you still got it? It was like, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. I
So
feel like
it's-
when you're
it's me.
involved into language, like what you're doing, the translating and the converting texts and things like that, that I feel like it kind of keeps you in the language. Because for me, doing Australian English, I will be the first to admit that my first couple of years here in India, before I was started teaching online, I swear my English was diminishing. Only because my husband, his English is his third language. So I found that I would change my vocabulary and simplify my way of speaking and change my way of speaking to communicate with him in an easier way. But now that I'm teaching Australian English and I'm able to talk more about it, I feel like that kind of brought me back to my English skills.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. This is also the same, in a very similar pattern happened to me because, of course, the first few years living in the UK, I was working in a British office environment to start off with.
Okay.
And so, of course, my English became a little bit more adapted, you could really
Yeah.
say. Though I was actually encouraged to be as Aussie as possible because one workplace actually said this to me. We hired you because we've got an Aussie on each floor and our job is to make everybody happy. And so it was like, I'm perfectly fine with that.
You were the diversity hire.
Yeah, basically, yeah, we did. I was talking with the other two Aussies on the, so it was a 3-level place. And it was like, so what do you do? It was like, oh, crack jokes and say a lot of, things that British people can't get away with. And they love it. And it was just like, this is the advantage of having this accent. So that was encouraged in a way. And then after, so I was working at a subtitling company with international, and I was on the phone. I remember that I would like adopt a very international accent so that people could actually understand me a lot better. But I'm no longer there. I've been working freelance. I work at home. So I don't have to interact as much on a 9-to-5 basis with people. So it also keeps the, in track, especially for this Australian adaptation stuff.
Yeah.
And I do go back twice a year to Australia as well.
Oh,
because,
amazing.
you have to. You have to. Mind you, every time I come back from Australia, everyone in the office used to say, stand back and listen to him. And I did sound like basically Steve Irwin.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, yeah, all right. And they were like, Nick,
it happens, doesn't it?
I don't think it's that whole thing. I'm sure this happens too, that like, because you don't get to hear the accent as in its natural environment until you get to like on the flight. On the flight. And then you hear other people and you're like, oh my God, is that what we sound like? Oh my God, that's coming out of my mouth. Wow. Really? We're not, we're so unaware.
I nearly cried actually the first time this happened. Tears of joy. I was going through Singapore. It was my first time leaving India after 3.5 years. My first time going back since moving here, actually, and it was after COVID. And I remember walking around Singapore. I shared a LinkedIn post about this morning, actually, about how I turned vegetarian during those 3.5 years, and I got to Singapore and I had no idea what to eat, and I just started crying because I'm like, what can I eat? I got Burger King in the end, vegetarian Burger King, vegan Burger King. But I remember going to 7-Eleven to buy some snacks for my last flight. And even, so here in India, you probably saw this when you visited, people don't queue up. People just, they're cutting in front, they gather all together. And I just went straight to the counter and I looked up and there's a line and everyone's looking at me and I've gone, oh my God. So then I was so embarrassed. Yeah. So then again, that was like another reverse culture shock for me. I've lined up. Anyway, the guy in front of me went to pay and the attendant said, do you need a bag for this? And he goes, nah, mate, she'll be right. I was like, oh my God, I'm nearly home.
Exactly. Oh my God, I can say stuff without actually thinking, do they really understand me? This is the thing.
Yes.
And then,
of
of course, what comes... Let's see. You know what? And also, it comes with it in the fact that and there's been plenty of times you go in, you're sitting down the plane. Quite often, I'm pretty good at trying and getting myself first on board. And I'll be sitting there, and you get especially the old Aussie couples. They're like, they're like as if they're like my mum and dad in a way. And they're like, and they're bound to say something to you, like, oh,
Yes.
good for you, you got on first, and you start that banter. And it was just like, we're on our way.
I'm on my way
That's
home.
it. We're in. Yeah, this is the culture. This is how it is.
Yeah.
And if you don't reply back, it was like, well, what's up with him? That's such a
Yes.
key.
Yes. So true. That's something I teach my students with small talk, because people don't really realize that you have to reciprocate the questions back. So if someone says to you, you're going through Woolies checkout, and someone says, hey, how you going? And you just say, good. And you don't say anything back, they're going to think, what the fuck's wrong with her?
Exactly. No, true. It very much is. It's a case of like, how you going? Yeah, Solid. How's your day been? Oh, not too bad.
Got any plans for today? Any plans for the weekend? Oh, that sounds nice.
Exactly. It really is. Okay, it gets annoying when they're doing it with the bus driver and you're waiting in the back of the bus, I have to say. Oh, that's where my London side comes from. It's like, don't talk now. Get the driver driving. I need to get there.
Now, just quickly, I want to go back to you where you said you grew up in Elizabeth. Was that the name of the city, the town?
I was born in Elizabeth, grew up in Salisbury to start off with.
Okay.
So that was the first 7 years of my life. And then after that, moved to Fulham Gardens. And Fulham Gardens is ethnic central, I have to say, really.
Yeah. Elizabeth, is that one of the areas? Because when I first started this podcast, I interviewed a young guy who was born in near London, but he immigrated with his family. So he's grown up in Australia, basically. But he was saying that there's a couple of little pockets of Adelaide area, and we're getting into this in a minute, that have that more kind of cultivated, refined accent. And I think I remember him saying Elizabeth might be one of them. Is that right?
Well,
or is that a different area?
I wouldn't say Elizabeth does, but the one thing great about Elizabeth is that traditionally, if you wanted to actually immerse yourself in various British accents, that's the place to go. So we got that, growing up. There was always somebody who was speaking, whether it would be like Manchester or Geordie or Brummie or Scottish or Irish. Yeah, we're so used to it, actually. And you know what? It also happens that even if you go to Australia today, you do get a variety of British accents on television. We always had, there was always quite a few of these actors and things like that who were born in the UK and, moved to Australia and they were on television. So we got that exposure. But going back, cultivated accent, if you're going to find a cultivated accent, you're going to find them in the eastern suburbs, for sure.
Yeah, okay.
Hop over to Burnside Village and that's where you'll have people. Oh, God, we got stories there, I tell you. I had one friend that was working at the Coles there, and he got told off by one of the people saying, I don't appreciate your cavalier attitude. So, you do get the pretentiousness does, raise it's up a notch there, basically. But if you are going to get that sort of the very diminishing cultivated accent, you are going to find it in pockets in the eastern suburbs of Adelaide in particular. But also there are areas in the inner city, the inner northern suburbs, for instance, as well, you'll find it.
Okay. So let's quickly chat about the South Australian accent, because people ask me, can I tell the difference between different city accents? I personally cannot. If you think of Sydney and Brisbane, they're very, very similar. Melbourne, almost the same. They use a bit less slang and it's a bit less it's a bit more formal down there. But then from what I've heard, and there are a few words that in Adelaide are pronounced differently. So tell me about the South Australian accent. What sets it apart from the rest of Australia?
Okay. We have two in particular elements that make our accents particular. And that is, you have that air sound that is typical for Australian English. In South Australia, we have the R vowels instead. So it makes it sound a bit posh.
Yes.
So that happens, and it's still very much a South Australian thing. So I do have one of the things that we like talking about, for instance, is there are certain words like that end in NCE, MD, or you found out just before when I said advantage. As advantage. NGT.
I say advantage.
So we use these. advantage. Yeah. So we grow up. So I never can say France. I say France, for instance.
Yes.
It was such a revelation in the 80s when national television became national, if you could say. Really? I think this was the big, before 1987, before that, every state had its own television, and it was very rare to have, we didn't have national news broadcasts, which is something that most other countries don't understand. So this is what was able to hold on to some of these regionalisms in particular. One of the things that we have is that, I cannot say, it has to be France. It has to be castle, not castle. That I got to, like Newcastle.
See, I say castle. See, that's what I mean. I say castle. I've never said castle. So I have like this hybrid blend. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so it's not only just in South Australia, it just happens more often in South Australia.
Yeah.
So, but again, it doesn't happen. Dance. Right. That's the story.
Let's go
now,
dancing.
The thing is that I cannot say dance. I can't. Personally, I can't. It's dance. It's always dance.
Okay, so opposite, like me with castle and castle.
Yeah. But the thing is that we've got a radio station that started in the late 90s, and it was doing dance music. And their slogan basically was like, fresh at home, the home of dance. And I was just like, I'm thinking of like ballroom dancing.
Yeah, right. Like Bridgerton style.
Dancing, but not dancing. See, that's why I make a distinction there. But yeah, just to hear the like, pump, 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 doof, doof music. And then they're talking about the home of dance. And it's just like, come on, guys.
Yeah, that would feel a bit weird.
It does. But this is one of the things that is very South Australian. And you will get, for anyone that's moving to South Australia, it does help to use these type of vowels when necessary. So, for instance, you will get a few eyebrows raised and right next to the University of South Australia campus in the western part of the CBD, we have the Adelaide Remand Centre. So if someone says the Adelaide Remand Centre, it would be like, what? Oh, a Remand Centre. That's what you mean. So, yeah. And we make
suppose
demand.
It's like demand.
Yep.
Yes, demand.
Absolutely.
Example.
Yes. So we do, and you know what? It does stand out when you move out. So my parents no longer, my mother's born and bred Adelaide. And when they retired over 10 years ago, they moved to Perth. And my mother, who speaks proper South Australian English, I have to say, she gets quite often from people, locals in West Australia, saying, where's that twang from? And they think that she's being pretentious. Twang, of all things. And she hates that term. And I was like, it is. It's horrible.
It's hardly a twang.
It's not a twang. Yeah, but where's that twang from?
Oh, my gosh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Adelaide, mate.
Yeah, it's Adelaide. Yeah, they think that she's from overseas at times. Which is like, no, that's just Adelaide. But it has been tempered, I have to say, because national television. Oh, so the other thing that also South Australia, and this was the thing that national television, especially programs like Home and Away, introduced us to the way that people in the eastern states speak, which at times was like, is that how they say it? And one of the things that was apparent was the way that we pronounce double O-L words. Oh. So, for instance, we don't say school or school like you do in other parts of Australia. No, quick and short, school. Okay? I'm going to school. Really? So the L is almost non-existent at the end. So, yeah. School.
I didn't know that. Okay. Right. I thought you were going to say that you say ool, but I think that's Queensland, pool. I'm going to
that's
the pool.
Very
I'm
Queensland.
going to school. Yeah. Yes. I say, I'm going to the pool.
Yeah.
I'm going to school. So that's my New South Wales side.
That's it. But South Australia, I'm going to the pool. So,
pool.
it's really, pool. That's it. So it's P-O-O-W. So it's a lazy L, and it's almost non-existent. So, pool, school, cool, and quick.
Right.
That's very South Australian, I have to say. So,
okay.
If you can
I've learned something new. That's amazing.
pronunciations-
Thank you.
No worries. We also have our own South Australian terminology, I have to say.
Okay.
So there are certain things. And one thing that I have to point out, and this is a big plus for people from India, you can shift in Australia, in South Australia as well. We're shifting as well. So when you don't move house in Australia, in South Australia, we shift house. Yes, it's one of the few places. I mean, that's one of the most iconic Indian English verbs. So, we shift
Absolutely.
house,
You
we're
just put
shifting.
karana on the end to the doing part. Shift karana. Shift karo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
Shift karungi.
apparently,
I will
like,
shift. Yeah.
yeah. It's South Australian as well. So we have it as well. Nowhere else in Australia do they use this. This is always one of the things when South Australians move to other parts of Australia and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, we're shifting. And it's like, oh, what? We're shifting house. And people are like, oh, what, are you physically moving it? What are you doing here? Like, no, we're moving. So, yeah, I know that also in Auckland and New Zealand, they also use this as well.
Okay.
And supposedly, I heard one I've never been able to confirm. I've never been able to find the source for this, but I read somewhere that it originated from Scottish English. But having asked people that actually live in Scotland, which I've got quite a few friends, linguists themselves, they've never heard that being used. So it could be a term that went out of fashion, like so many other things that are
Of course.
in Australian English and also in Indian English, that they were words that were once used in the UK, in the regions of the UK, and that have stayed on. And they are no longer, they're
there
now
are
obsolete.
so many here. I don't know if you saw this one, but there are things, I remember hearing it one time, like in India, and I'm like, what the hell does that mean? And it's something that was introduced by the British and just obviously never developed when the British left, which is photostat. Did you see that? It means to photocopy. No. I need to get a photostat done. I need to get a photocopy. Yeah.
Wow.
And you'll see it on signs everywhere. Photostat, photostat, photostat. Yeah. Or they'll just refer to the actual name. Like, you know how we call paracetamol Panadol or Esky, the brand's name. So they'll call it a Xerox. I have to get a Xerox
All right.
done.
Oh, that's international, I have to say. You can go to many places, say, for instance, all throughout Eastern Europe, and you'll see signs, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
And, that's photocopying, for instance.
Oh,
so,
yeah. There you go.
Yeah. So that happens quite a bit. Yeah, I understand where that came through. But I saw one of the things I noticed when the first place I entered into in India was in Mumbai, and I saw chemist and druggist, which was the term, the official term in the UK up until 1953. So that's where that came from.
Where that came from.
Yeah. But it just continued its use in India, but of course it's now no longer way off in the UK. So that was one of the things. So shifting, yes, we're into shifting in South Australia. So you're on for that. Yeah. One particular word that you never get to see written anywhere, but you will hear it in South Australia, is bunta. And it usually is in the phrase, the crowd has gone bunta. Okay?
Oh, does that mean wild? Like they've gone crazy?
They've gone crazy. Yeah, the crowd, you see,
kind of like
you hear it,
bonkers in a way.
Yeah, out of control, loud yelling and things like that. So, and you used to hear it, especially with South Australian football commentators used to say, and the crowd's gone bunta. All right, you don't, it's still, and it then goes on. So if someone is going, he's gone bunta, that means that someone's really angry and they're making a very big, loud show of it as well.
Okay. So, how do you spell
now
it?
they don't. B-O-O-N-T-A. Yes. Bunta.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was going to be E-R or we just put it in a schwa on the end or what.
Yeah. So they don't know where it comes from. So some people say that it's actually like a First Nations word, maybe from one of the languages from the York Peninsula. But I'd say it's more likely, and this is where also the R vowels come from as well, is that when South Australia started off as a European settlement, for the first few years, it had an equal amount of free settlers, mainly from Scotland, and refugees that came from Silesia, which is German-speaking refugees. Silesia is a region which nowadays is located on the border between Poland and Czechia. And so the way that you speak, of course, with German dialects, you don't have A. There is an A, which is an A umlaut. But for words like that, they wouldn't have said demand. They would have said demand. And there, probably stuck.
Okay.
And bunta, if you look at German, bunta means colourful. Okay. So I would say that's probably more of a case that someone's gone bunta, being more of this sort of this German
If you think
English,
of the phrase colourful language means kind of like crazy language, right? So that would make sense.
Yeah. And there are in the 19th century, right up into the early 20th century, there were these cross-switching and local languages that were created that were like German mixed with Australian English.
Right.
And that would have stuck. We've got that very big German influence, and that's from
Yes,
the
I
early
have
days.
heard of that. Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. I actually have not been to South Australia yet, but
Oh,
it's definitely on my bucket list to visit. Absolutely. I would love to visit. I do have a really close friend that is from Adelaide. She's the only Australian I know who lives there. I have a couple of Indian friends there, but yeah, the only Australian. I know one Australian from Adelaide.
Right.
And come to think of it, I actually think she does do the R vowel sound like demand.
Yeah.
I can imagine her saying that. So yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have to
You do
ask her, can you
stand
send me a
out.
voice message with these words?
Yes.
Do you know what bunta
I'll
means?
do so. Yeah, do ask, actually.
I'll ask her. I
because,
will actually.
Yeah.
I'll
You know,
write it
when we
down.
talk about South Australian English, we got to bring out the one we have contributed to Australian English in general. And our best contribution would have to be heaps. So, you know, when something is
is that
heaps
South
good.
Australian?
South Australian, yeah. So the
Yeah.
story there is that, what was it? It went national about a decade ago. And so I'm now seeing that, you know, people that are talking about Australian English on social media and things like that, and they're using heaps, you know, like, oh, wow, I'm Aussie, I use heaps. And I think even the Macquarie Dictionary were actually saying that, oh, he originated from the 90s. It's like, guys, we were saying it in the late 70s. Okay.
There you go.
Everything was heaps good. Oh my God. Yeah. Oh, that was so scary. Yeah. Heaps, you know, so very
Yes.
much a South Australian term. Even like about 20 years ago, some of the South Australian quirky sites about, you know, like Just Adelaide and stuff like that, or their predecessors, they had merch, for instance, that would be like South Australian, heaps good, you know, so that
true.
is. Well, so that was that's something very South Australia that went national. So yeah,
There you go. I didn't know that. I didn't know the history of that one. Very interesting. I love it. Now, let's talk about your adapting your content. So you've done a lot of work, obviously, adapting content into Australian English, like you said. So what do you think makes Australian English stand out from other dialects of English, especially in writing?
Oh, right. Well, definitely the whole thing about writing is that it's far more subtle, I have to say.
Yeah.
This is the thing that always gets a lot of clients. I don't think people really understand, and not even us Australians will be able to tell you what makes written Australian English what it is, okay?
Yeah.
The thing that they would be able to tell you is that if they get handed something that's in US English or even UK English, they'll just like, it don't sound right. Okay, it doesn't sound right. And the main reason for it is that we do have different levels of formality. And that's reflected in the way that we use the words. First of all, just to let you know that I only got into this by pure accident, I have to say. I think we all do.
Yeah,
the thing is
absolutely.
that as my job is as a translator, and so translating from my languages into English, that's my main job. Well, now the Australian English, I have to say it's about 50-50 as well.
Yeah.
So what happens is one time I had this one company, this is about almost 20 years ago, and said, you're born in Australia, you're Aussie. And it's like, yeah, we've got this stuff that needs to be done into Australian English. And I'm like, I had heard that this is a thing. I remember watching some show as a child where they said like novels need to change it for Australia. And I never thought anything more about it afterwards. But, you know, when I was told this, and it really stuck in my mind, it's like, yeah, actually we don't, you know, the spellings, for instance, in particular. So like ISC instead of IZE spellings, for instance, and zation, the OUR spellings and things like that, that doesn't happen across the board. So, of course, people think when I'm given a job to adapt for Australian English, they think, oh, you just only have to change a couple of spellings here and there and that's it. No, it's not that.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, yes, of course, that's a very important part of things, but we have differences in vocabulary, and that even changes even between the UK. I mean, from the US English to Australian English, there's a greater difference.
Yeah.
But from UK English, they think, oh, it's exactly the same. No, it isn't. But the main thing, and this is what really gets them infuriated, is the fact that we use a different tone when we write in our levels of formality or informality, you could really say.
Yeah.
So I'll give an example of where it does change considerably. And that is when we write this is not so much when we speak this, the use of the word please. Now, in the UK, they love putting, and even now in the US, especially if you go into ChatGPT and the level of form, they're like, please do, please.
Yeah.
So doesn't work with Aussies. No, really. When you see a please, that is just a suggestion. Please, could you do? But it won't be a problem if you don't. But we would like you to do.
Yeah.
However, if it's an instruction, no, please. You do this, okay? And that's how we're used to this. This also appears also in New Zealand English. So I recently had text where it's like, please, can you complete the form or something like that? No, complete this form, okay? And hand it to your doctor. That's what it is. And it's for Brits, they're like, oh my God, that's so rude. But for Australians, it's like, well, they're instructing us to do it. Yeah, who do they think they are? Oh, God. Or like, I've written stuff, especially on LinkedIn, and I've had my British colleagues say, oh, that would be fine, but it's so rude. They haven't said please. And I was like, but they haven't said it. It's written. But it's an instruction. There's no please here. You have to do it. So that's the thing. We do not have this whole please thing happening.
Yeah.
So it is thinking through because we still get a lot of text and copy that is essentially US English or UK English coming through. But we also have other things. We've got like slight differences in punctuation. There's also capitalization that changes as well, which has changed over the years. So the type of capitalization that I was taught at school, back in school, back in the 80s, for instance, has changed. So one of the things, we don't use title case anywhere the same degree that we used to. It's very much more of a sentence case. And that's something that's also reflected in UK English. Okay. It's not used across the board because unlike other languages, we're not dictated by an academy of language, that sets rules. We've got conventions. So they're never set in stone. And then punctuation. I mean, we've got simple things. Say, for instance, initialisms and acronyms. Before, when I was at school, you had to put dots. You had to put full stops in them. We don't do that anymore. It looks really old-fashioned. Americans still do that. So so these little things. Now, the whole point is that when clients, they're like, oh, my God, why have you done all these changes? And I was like, well, you want it in Aussie, don't you? But the point is that, like I said, that Aussies won't be able to pinpoint why it doesn't sound right, but they will sense that something's not right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you've already got sowed the seeds of doubt in this way, you've lost them. That's it. You've lost anyone where they're like, oh, something's not right here. They'll think that you're unprofessional. They've got their mind not focused on what should be the text. And this is why it's so important to have stuff localized like this, so that you don't want them to wander. You don't want them to wander from it. And also, the other thing is that I turn into the worst. My job essentially is being the worst type of Aussie grammar Nazi that will be like rallying against this, oh my God, all these Americanisms. Oh, this is, how horrible it is. You don't want to have the excuse to allow for these people to start complaining. Because if they do start, that's it.
It won't stop.
Really. Yeah. And we've got some very bad situations where that's happened, I have to say. Cookie. Oh, Cookie Gate. Wow. Oh my God.
Don't call them Anzac cookies.
Oh, do you know that it's actually, you can be fined for doing that? This is true. I love telling people this, that it's being mandated by governments, okay? So the Department of Veteran Affairs have ruled, and this is law, that if anyone is marketing them as Anzac cookies, they are liable for a fine from $10,000 to $50,000. I agree.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. What is an Anzac cookie? Oh my gosh, I had no idea about that too.
Well, we've had that. There was one time on one of the morning TV shows. I forgot who the presenter was, and they were, in the lead up for Anzac Day coming up this month, and they were making Anzac biscuits live on air, and she called it a cookie. Whoa. The response was huge. That she had to go on television and issue a groveling apology to the Australian public for her, I will never commit that sin again. She used that words. And that was how... Gosh. Yeah. But this is the thing. It was like, so we had one time, and I was working with two other people, and I was second in line in the whole review process. Yeah. And it was these sort of biscuits. around, I don't know. So first of all, I didn't know. I just was given just a word description of it, and they were calling them cookies. And there is, of course, in Australia, you can call stuff cookies, but they have to be homemade, individually sold, yay big, which Anzac biscuits fit into this group. That's why you get people mixing it up. But you can never call Tim Tams or your ice bobos or your mint slices cookies. Never. That's it.
Yeah.
So anyway,
it's called a biscuit aisle for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. So, God, I'm being Roy HG here. That's it. So, you know what? It already gone through one Aussie, okay? And they allowed for cookies, okay? All right, thinking, well, they know their stuff, okay? So if they've allowed for cookies, then, okay, fine. It went to the third person raised it and said, no, I'm not really sure. And so the project manager came back to me and said, the third person's raised an issue about it being called cookies. And so that's it. I was like, okay, visuals. Please send us visuals. We need the visuals. Yeah. And they sent us the visuals and we're like, oh no, biscuits. Has to be biscuits. And
Oh my gosh.
That's it. We told them for their own sake, do not call these cookies. They have to be biscuits. Wow. So that was something I saw what the other two had to say. And whoa, we were like,
and in the world of social media, I can imagine that people would just lose their mind back in the 60s, 70s, 80s or whatever, obviously well before internet. If people wanted to complain about something they saw on TV, like let's say this woman calling something a cookie, people would be writing into the editor.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now it's like getting online. It's just too, everything's too accessible and it would have easily blown up overnight. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
You got to be careful.
It's really very careful. And we've had loads of situations where it's the most innocuous of things that actually can be the most problematic. Like no one, like I tell this story to people outside of Australia, well, like Brits and Kiwis and South Africans, they understand of course, about the whole thing. But when I tell people from other parts of the world, it's like, what's the matter? And I'm like, oh, no. It's, you know what? Personal, it's not a personal thing for me. Languages change. That's what happens. But I know for the benefit of the client, you don't want to go into this minefield. And we're doing this to help them. This is what can happen in Australia. And you know what? It happens in the most, the most innocent of things. So I had a questionnaire recently. And after each question, so I asked a question and straight afterwards, please explain. There you go. Can you tell me what you did that time? Please explain. Please explain. Please explain. And I'm like, no, you can't have that. Sorry. You can't have that. And they're like, what's the problem with please explain? It's like, don't you mean please explain? Yeah. And I had to explain.
Did you show them? Did you show them that video?
I
did you explain Pauline Hanson
too much. I had that ready if they were to get to that level.
Oh, they questioned it more.
We've got a very I said, unfortunately, it's a particular phrase that even has been co-opted by Pauline Hanson, the politician, very controversial one, and people know it. And as like how we said it in the accent. Straight away. That's it. And it was like, look, yes, I understand. You're asking legitimately, please explain. Okay. And that's a suggestion as well. So that was perfectly fine. But the thing is that any Aussie reading it, the first thing they're going to have is the accent, Pauline Hanson saying, lost focus. You're not going to.
Exactly.
Really. That's it. Everyone's just going to be thinking, oh my God, Pauline Hanson. And it's also got a connotation, not just on the interview that happened on 60 Minutes in 1997, for heaven's sake, still around this connotation, scarily. She co-opted it and even has podcasts with the name Please Explain. So, she's owned it.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere by the sounds of it.
No, not at all. And so what did we end up having to do with that? Basically, it's like, could you explain or something like that? We had to change it, really. The connotation with it, because people were starting to use it, like when you ask something and, like, oh, blah, 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 blah. So please explain, that's...
Yes, so true.
everyday speech sort of thing,
Yeah.
and that's part of the vernacular.
It was used in a very sarcastic way too, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
that's the thing. And so it's like, look, it's not how you think it means in Australia. It's got a connotation. So people aren't going to respond in the way that you want it to. So it's simple things like, very innocent things, and they can have a big repercussions. So, this is the nature of my work. I mean, having to explain, I do a lot of surveys as well, and it's been adapted for Australia. Having to explain that there's no hypermarkets in Australia is always a bit of a challenge. It was like, what, you don't have like Walmart in Australia? Nah. We've tried it many a time, failed, okay? Can't have it as an option, gone. I had one time with footwear. What type of footwear do you like wearing outdoors? Of course, flip-flops get changed to thongs. And people like in the UK in particular, like, are you talking about the underwear?
What in
like,
South
no.
Australia? In South Australia, what do you call like sports shoes?
Sheep sneakers. Yeah, that is one of the words. Excellent, good example. So whenever I've had something like that, like what you just said, I change it to sports shoes because that's like the terminology used by retailers in Australia online. Yeah. Otherwise, you've got your sneakers, your runners, your joggers. How do you say it?
I say joggers, but to be honest, that's changed here to sports shoes now because in Indian English, joggers are trackies. Yeah. So lowers. So they call lowers joggers or lowers or whatever. So I remember when I first moved here, my husband had said to me, can you get my joggers for me? So I went and grabbed his sports shoes. And then he's like, where are my joggers? I'm like, they're here. He's like, they're my sports shoes. Why did you get my sports shoes? I was like, what did you want? And then he said like the other word, which is lowers. And I was like, yeah, we call them joggers in New South Wales.
These ones. What he wanted? He wanted tracky dacks then.
He did want his tracky dacks. Yeah, and I'm like, they're your trackies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there was we had that. Oh, what was it? Ugg boots as an outdoor gear. Like you wear that outdoors, and I've had to like. But didn't you invent the thing? So it's like you don't particularly wear Ugg boots. No,
they're slippers.
Exactly. Oh, how many times got this like this? You know what? I still to this day because they wear them outdoors in all throughout Europe, for instance, and I still, when I see them, people walking past wearing them, I just stare. I really do think like it's been like 2 decades now, and I'm just like, wow. I've written about this also on the net and stuff, and I've explained the major connotation. One time, for instance, when my parents live in a retirement village, and my mother was trying to say in a very nice way that one of the other residents has got dementia. And instead of actually saying it outright, my mother said, oh, she's not in a good state. She wears her Ugg boots outdoors. That's it. I just straight away what she meant. That's the thing. No, you can't put this on a list of like, do you wear this outdoors? So it's always these sort of cultural references as well that comes into it. Explaining about work status, for instance, that we've got 3. It's, full-time, part-time, and casual. You have to add casual as a separate. In the UK, you never get that, for instance. It's always full-time and part-time.
So is part-time casual in the UK? Is that what casual falls under? Or?
Over here, it's called 0 hours contracts, and it's sort of a relatively new concept, you could really say. So not as much like how it's very much, that's been, even all my lifetime, there's always been casual as a separate work category, you could really say.
Yeah, definitely.
It's so much,
when I've got a casual job, I've got a part-time job, full-time job. Yeah,
totally. And we understand what they encompass, you could really say, in terms of hours and safety and stuff like that, entitlements and stuff. So, there's these things that make my job very important, you could really say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And earlier before I hit record, we were talking about ethnic Australian accents, and you were just saying that you moved to Fulham Gardens, which has a lot of ethnic. What did you say? There's a lot of ethnic people there, or ethnics, let's say.
Oh, you've got a lot of people, our type of people there, of course. But now I'm speaking a little bit. So if I'm talking, this is how my father talks, of course, because he doesn't speak English as the first language. And a lot of people like he around, because he's from Macedonia, you hear the Macedonia. It's a lovely country. And that's how people speak. You speak with the other people like this, and you also speak with the people from the other countries. And they all speak like this, and they all understand each other. Okay.
I love it.
How did I get this? This is one thing.
Yeah, and this is where yeah. And so as you know, I teach Australian English, but they say that there's 3 Australian accents. You're broad, you're general, you're cultivated. And as much as that, yes, I use this as an introduction for new people coming to Australia, it's just so much more nuanced when you start looking at immigration patterns, where people live, the jobs they have, the upbringing they had. Especially immigration patterns is a really, really big one. So then obviously that was your father, accent you did, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But
so then obviously like you and your siblings are exposed to that kind of way of speaking.
Exactly.
That impacts your own accent, right?
Definitely. And this is something that I think the last time I was in Australia, which was last month, it was even more apparent, I have to say.
Okay.
So one of the things that happens, and this happens with people who are the first generation of people who are from non-English speaking backgrounds born in Australia. So that essentially is me.
My mum.
And especially if both parents, if both parents are foreign born and do not have English as their first language, that affects the accent that then this first generation speak. Now, the thing is that I speak in it's a very identifiably Australian accent. Some people even growing up were like, Nick, how did you end up with this accent? Okay, because, and I will get to the accent that I should be speaking. This is the accent that I do speak with my father. But my accent is thanks mainly to my mother born in Australia more than anything else. And also the fact that it was a bit of a coping mechanism, you could really say. And the fact that because I was being questioned all the time about my Australianness, it became this sort of I pop into broad like you wouldn't believe as well and getting your Aussie stuff. Even one time even said bonza out of the blue. And I even, did I say that? And they're like, yeah. It did. I'm like, so I've got a very identifiably Australian accent. But if I'm talking to my father, then I go into this sort of accent that is a little bit more influenced by, of course, from Macedonian, because, and this is the way that other Macedonian Australians, we speak like this, okay? Because we can go back into and forth between нашите язици. And that's where it comes from. So when you're talking, you come from a cross-switching bilingual environment, which it wasn't so much the case eventually in my house because we were forced into speaking English. That's a totally different story, I have to say. But I still had to speak with my grandparents because they didn't know English. So, but talking with my Macedonian friends in Australia, and all of them were speaking like this. You're right, mate. And so they've picked up, of course, from their parents, their English is picked up, having been mostly manual laborers, low-skilled jobs. Yeah. They were working with working-class Aussies in the 50s and 60s, 70s, who were speaking in broad Aussie accents. So they picked up long vowels, especially with my father. Like, so when he talks about, rather than saying, Macedonia, and it really is elongated, Macedonia. Sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, bless them.
Yeah.
But the ones born in Australia, we speak like this. Perfect example, if you really want to hear this, what was it? Australian Macedonian comedian, my cousin Vlad. Not my cousin, but that's his name. My cousin Vlad. And he speaks like this all the time in a proper Sydney Macedonian accent. Yes. And it's very similar all across the board.
Is that your Western Sydney accent?
Yeah. And then, of course, there are slight variances based on the heritage language. So, of course, you've got a distinct Lebo Sydney accent, which, Habibi.
Your Italian Sydney accent.
Italian Sydney accent. It's influenced by the Italian.
I grew up
Greek
with.
accent. Yeah, this is it. And so they still, and of course, you've got new ones coming through based on new immigration patterns. Of course, you've got there's even like an Indian Australian accent. And Neil Kolhatkar, Indian Australian comedian, look him up. He does these accents really well. He does others as well. So if you want, of course, it'd be slightly exaggerated for comedic effect, but good person to listen to hear and familiarize yourself with the various accents that you would hear in suburban Australia, I have to say, especially in a place like Sydney or Melbourne for that matter. So and
absolutely.
this is something, it is very much an identifier, it's an identity marker.
It is, yeah. Oh, yes. My nono, so my mum's dad, I never met him. He passed away before I was born, but he was a labourer. And my mum's brother-in-law, I think he was a rookie. He's retired now, but as much as he doesn't want to retire, but he needs to retire. So yes, definitely like my cousins, like that's their dad. My cousins have that kind of Western Sydney, not a super strong accent, but those longer vowels, again, because of the immigration patterns of their parents and their grandparents, plus the working where their parents worked. So my Uncle Ralph, he worked as a tradesman or a labourer. So, working on those job sites in the 70s and 80s, so, they definitely pick up those sorts of ways of speaking. And for me, I think some of the slang or the informal language that I use is definitely influenced from my dad, whose dad was from England. So some of the things that I say, what did Dad say on the weekend when I spoke to him? Donkey's years. And I just heard that on Neighbours a little while ago, but I didn't realise my dad speaks with quite a lot of slang. Even before Gran passed away, she went to hospital and they decided to send her home to make her comfortable, basically put her on end-of-life care. And I asked when they were going to move her, and he said, just as soon as possible, because she's in a room at the moment with 4 other oldies, and one guy next to her keeps getting up starkers. Yeah, so to people watching, starkers means stark naked, completely butt naked. Every time he had to go and take a piss, go to the toilet. Yeah, and I mean, a lot of that is really Australian English anyway, but just when I'm thinking of stuff that my dad said growing up, now that I'm looking more and more into Australian English slang and everything, I've started to realise that there's definitely more of a British influence that has come from Granddad. Yeah.
There's one thing, and this is something that I find, especially because I'm between the UK and Australia quite often, and it's starting to taper off, but it's unbelievable the amount that UK slang still influences Australian slang. And so a lot of the terms that come from the UK still seek their way into Australia. The best example of in the past, or in this century that is, was pear-shaped, which I'd never heard of until I went to the UK in 2001. Everyone was talking about, that went pear-shaped, this is pear-shaped, 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 pear-shaped. I go back to Australia in 2003. I'd never heard it in Australia, and everyone's talking about pear-shaped. And I was like, so that came through from the UK.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
So things
do
like
you think
that,
that's from UK like media, like TVs and movies and stuff?
We love UK comedy because we get it.
Exactly.
Essentially.
Yeah.
And a lot of these type of things are going to be through there.
Okay.
And the other thing as well is that we still have a very high level of immigration coming from the UK to Australia. And so it's still, in a way, they're influencing, in some aspects, they do influence language more so than what Australians would actually admit.
For sure.
And not as much you think that American English would be more of an influence, which it is an influence, without a doubt. But I do think that it is tapering off because you don't get to hear as much about, say, for instance, the kids, which I rely on my nephews and nieces in Australia to keep me up to date with stuff, and God do they. And they're not as familiar with the UK stuff as they are with US stuff, I have to say, which is, definitely.
Yeah, so it's probably
though they
changing
were
a lot
able
more
to tell me about. So
I said it's changing a lot more now.
Oh, yeah. They were able to tell me, for instance, when I got to hear about Eshays and Adelaides, which I hadn't. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I didn't know what an Eshay was until I went back home one of the first times, and I started hearing it more when I was back home. It's an Eshay. And then when I actually put I did a little bit in my online course about people in Australia, and I actually had to research what an Eshay was. And apparently, like this subculture, it's much more common now, but it started back in the 80s. I think
in Sydney.
Was it Sydney?
In Western Sydney. Yeah.
Exactly. But now it's just kind of become more popular in Melbourne.
The term has become, Western Australia, big about this whole thing. And it seems to be more of a case that more people just talk about it. But when trying to actually, I get my 12-year-old nephew, for instance, and he was talking about, oh, they're making a skate track down the park. It's going to bring all the air shows. And I'm like, what the hell is he going on about? And so I remember I was testing it out to see if this is just a very local term. And then I remember I went to an event at a friend's place on the other side of Perth, and I just casually, I love testing out like this. I just said, so what do you think of those air shows? And people started talking. They had an issue. Oh, they had something to talk about. And it just seemed more like, because you got the tabloid press and the media sites were making them into enemy number one and stuff like that, that people just seemed more aware through that rather than
it's almost
actually
just like your
knowing
local drop
any.
kick, though, isn't it? Like when I sort of was looking at the definition, like, but I guess, there is more some specific parts of the subculture, but it just sounds like some drop kick.
Well, basically, it's like a new form of bogan, which, of course, was the new form of sharpie. You know, so it's like
every generation has one.
Every generation has one. It is coming up when I do. I've got my next thing that I'm going to be writing about is the changed meanings for Sharpie and Texter, basically. So, and how generational
that would be really
it is.
interesting.
So,
it's
coming up.
Yeah.
Yep. I tried out with the word Sharpie with my mother just to see if she remembered the term, because she certainly grew up in the whole thing. Yeah. And she still had to get it all mixed up. The fact that a Sharpie is a marker pen, which of course, thanks to especially
Texter.
Yeah. Which is taken over from Texter, which of course, when talking to my nephews and nieces, if you talk Texter, they're thinking, oh, what, somebody who likes Texter instead of...
no, it's this little thing. To people watching, I don't have any normal texters. I've just got a mini texter, but my dog chewed the lid. Little texter.
There you go. Yep, that's it. They're the ones. Yeah, grew up with that.
I don't even know what I would call this here in India, to be honest. Marker, maybe coloured marker.
Marker. Yeah.
Like I this is what. Because you got your whiteboard marker, so I think we would just call it maybe a marker of some kind.
Yeah. UK marker, or marker pen. You know, but markers. That's something. But Sharpie's there here too, really. You know, which of course is the US brand name.
Is that just the brand name though?
Yeah, exactly. But in America, like what Texter was a trademark name, it was the first brand.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And
I can picture the logo now. Yeah.
Spelled with an A. I always thought it was an ER spelling. You know?
Texta, right?
Yeah.
Texter.
So, you know, the way that it's all pronounced and stuff. So, God, But if it's they really do help me out in finding out what's happening. The thing that they also told me is like, so what's an air show? But my nephew was able to tell me, oh, they're roadmen, which is the London equivalent. And I was like, how do you know this? And it's like, TikTok, you know? So, yeah.
What's the... I always forget the name of this. There's a Russian equivalent too, where they wear the trackies. That's it, Gokni.
Yeah, Gokni. Yeah, I got dressed up as one the other week.
Was that for a fancy dress party?
Oh, it was a special event. A very good friend of mine. She's also in the language industry. She's also one of the world's experts on search engine optimization. And she organizes SEO. I'm not fully involved in SEO, but I do get invited to events, SEO related events. And she does ones for people who do Slavic languages, which of course that's what I do. And so we decided we'd get dressed up for the event, and we got a photo of us. I got the ciggy, and I only needed a bit of a drink and stuff like that. But yeah, I look very natural. Actually, that's what I normally wear. I had the Adidas gear and everything. You know, that's me. Honestly, it's like, that's it. You know, Bogan, Gopnik, young Macedonian and stuff like that. Oh my God. Yeah, that's it. Every place has their own, I have to say.
They do. Yeah, because what's America? You're redneck?
Yeah,
trailer trash?
redneck, basically. Then every
Hillbilly,
place has their, I mean, it's crazy because in the UK, every part of the UK has, we're talking about like, you know, have their own term for it. So of course you get to hear the word chav, which is now out of,
someone did ask me that. They did say, is the Australian bogan similar to our chav? And I'm like, had to look it up. And I'm like, I guess you could say it's a bit similar.
Similar. Yeah. I mean, what was it? I'd say it's a bit more of a cashed up bogan, you could really say. You know,
true. Yeah, exactly.
More of the case because, you know, but you've got other terms. So like, for instance, in London, the traditional term is pikey. So, which I didn't know. Yeah. One time they said, it's full of pikeys. And I'm like, there's that to look it up. Yeah. Oh, okay. So that's what it means. Okay. Chav originally was solely a term used in Essex, and it comes from chavel, which is a Romany word for boy. So, yeah. There's a lot of Romany words that have entered into slang, and some of it actually even came from Slavic languages. So it's really interesting whenever something like that happens, I have to say.
Yeah. All right. So we'll probably have to start wrapping up a little bit, Nick. I know we didn't get through all the questions, but it was really, really great to talk and learn more about South Australian language and everything that you do. But if anyone is interested, I know that you're very active on LinkedIn. That's how we connected. But is there any other ways that people can contact you if they're interested to learn more or know more about what you do?
Absolutely. I mean, I keep it simple. So if you need to contact me about making your text and copy as Aussie as possible so that you don't go and experience your own cookie gate and save yourself possible fine of up to $50,000. Oh, dollary dues. No, we don't say that. We only say that ironically. Thank you, Simpson. You can always contact me by email at info@nicknasev.com. It's NICKNASEV.com.
Perfect.
Always, of course, there's my website, nicknasev.com, where we've got details about the services I offer. And I also have a blog there where I constantly write up about Australian English terms, just like I've mentioned about cookies. I've mentioned about, what was something recent that I did? Oh, Sharpie? L's and P's. Yep.
You're doing
coming up. Yeah. Your L's and your P's. She's just got on her L's and she'll soon be on her P's.
Driver's license, yes.
Yeah,
exactly. Right. Yeah, I see you share about this on LinkedIn, so that comes from your website, does it? When you
does come from the website. Okay. But I do have on LinkedIn. I'm also on Blue Sky under Nick Nasev. You can also get me at Substack, which I'm building up at the moment. You can also see me if you want to see some of my travel pics. Then you go to Instagram on Nick Nasev there. So that's a bit more, away from the work that I do.
Yeah.
If you're interested in Macedonian type of stuff, then that's X for me, basically, where I've got my connections with things there. Cool. So it's not Aussie stuff. But that's where I am. So, if you're interested.
I'll put all of that in the description for everyone. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Brilliant.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nick. It's been so great to talk. And, we'll have to do a follow-up. I was about to say lesson.
Please.
I got my teacher brain on. We'll have to do a follow-up episode. Absolutely. I would love that.
Oh God, I'm up for it. Thank you for having me on here. I love talking about Aussie English as much as you love talking about it. We love talking about it.
Yeah.
And I really like the fact that, Australian English, I don't think is, especially when it's used out, how it's properly used, how it's used actually out there in territory, out in the field, is not talked about enough on the net. And so thank you for the work that you're doing, I have to say, for getting it out there.
Trying my best.
Yeah. Oh, you're doing a good job. Don't you worry.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you.